If other topics come up during the evening, or any questions come up that have to do with the history of the island or hurricanes in particular, you're all very welcome to contribute and to speak. Before I introduce our honored guests, I just wanted to take a minute and tell you how excited I've been about researching hurricanes, because I had no idea about the history and how it was here. I come from northern Vermont, where we don't have hurricanes too often. The biggest one that people have in memory in the 19th century was in 1866. A devastating hurricane came along almost a century before the practice of naming these whirling monsters was adopted. The severity of this storm was such that it received the distinction of a name, the Great Bahama Hurricane, 1866. Lots of information from Paul Albert's book. Then we bought from Missabi across the road 2 very interesting books about the hurricanes of 26 and the hurricanes of 29 by a man named Wayne Neely, who has also written a very large tome that costs almost $100 to buy, of all the hurricanes in the Bahamas. These are mostly Nassau, some Marsh Harbor. I don't think 26 and 29 affected people here, but they weren't as bad up here as down there. So we have these 2 books, and they've been a big help. This book inspired me, Reminiscences of an Island Teacher. It's David Bethel's book, and I'm just going to read a short bit from it. The worst hurricane to strike the Key in living memory was in 1932. In those days there was little in the way of warning. This one came like a bolt from the blue and took everyone by surprise. No houses were battened and there were no hurricane huts. I found contradictions to that in other there were no hurricane huts, but some people were alarmed the day before it came and the barometer was going down. So many of the larger buildings had been constructed of blocks of local stone put together with lime mortar. When the hurricane was at its height, they collapsed as if they had been struck by an earthquake. Nobody sheltered in them, and then it says no lives were lost, but that's not true either. 7 people died in 32, right? Terrible things happened, and I'm not going on with that because we're going to talk about that.
I always thought that 11 people died in 32. They got 7 there, right?
This book says none. One other book I read said 18, and your memory, Marcel, is 11.
11, that's what I remember.
Okay. This Island Teacher is by a man named Jack Ford.
Anyhow, somebody be right.
Somebody is right. And I just need to show you, Mr. George Reckley here was a friend of Jack Ford's, weren't you? And he sailed with him quite a lot, and there's a picture of him in here in 1940, 50, 51, something like that, just about that. It's a fascinating book, and it's completely about Green Turtle. And this belongs to David Bethel, so if you want to borrow it, you have to borrow it from him. So we can have a lot of written sources about the hurricanes, but the best sources are oral and the people that have memories of them. And we're honored to have Marcel Sawyer here tonight and George Reckley. Marcel has been a fisherman all his life, and he's fished, as he told me, for everything in the ocean there is. George has been a builder. I had no idea how much building he'd done until I read this book. And went to sea quite a bit.
Yes.
And he's now a lay minister at St. Peter's Anglican Church on the island. So we're honored to have both of them here tonight. I guess we'll start with you, Marcel. We want to hear memories.
Well, I'm going to tell you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Boys and girls. Now, if I make a mistake, you'll let excuse me, because looking at all these pretty gals, you know, you can't even take my high, you know. So you'll have to just forgive me, you know. I'll be 86, but I still like to look.
Wait till they have this.
No. Anyhow, I'll start with first what the beginning, what I know. This was when, first of all, we didn't know the wireless, on the station, we had to depend on the barometer to tell us when the storm was coming at that time. We didn't have no wireless operator, nothing like that here. So after days, the weather keep getting bad, the barometer keep going down, keep getting worse, then people started to get scared. And when they started to get scared, well, people start praying. That's the first thing they do when they get scared. They start praying. And you only could hear for some people praying. But anyhow, my father up to look about 150 feet up and about southeast, and he saw this young man with a baby about 2 years old. And he saw a 4x4 slam both of them right across there and killed both of them dead in 1932. And it kept on blowing till finally, when it dropped off because the sun passed over us, a guy had a dining room, big dining room with a house joined there. And the people started flocking in there till it got so many in there, we had to stand up. You couldn't lay down, you couldn't sit down. For a day and a half nearly we had to stand up.
How old were you, Marcel?
I was 7 years old.
That's what age did you remember,
But
yeah.
hardly nothing to eat, So finally, it got so bad, the houses started blowing down. And I finally looked at a house on the west side of that was Alice Roker's house, George. And it was, I guess that's about a 14 by 18 or 24. And that was rocking just the same as a rocking chair. And a lot of the houses, I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, blow down off of the blocks, or the ground pans, blow down and sit on the ground. And they stayed there for a long time before they could block them up. And we had a man there, the barometers went down so low, till someone would come back. Yeah, that's what they always say.
Do you remember, Marcel, how low it went? Because I got 27 and something.
Anyhow, but we had a man. I want you to listen at this there. We had a colored man there. And after they went so low, and so then come, he said, you ought to just know how to read the barometer. He said, let me see how to read the barometer. He said, which hand moves? You got the joke? Now he can read it, but he got to tell him which hand moves. Colored guy, Yeah. So, and George, Mr. Reckley could tell you, we had a house that blew down, several houses, George, because when the roof blew off. The church of God, the roof blew off there, went down in the back road. We had one right there right now with New Plymouth Hard there, the roof blew, several houses the roof blew up and never George Reckley there, people live on the house roofs, sometimes, And we had a man there who used to keep church down there. Well, I guess he was only joking. He said he managed to come out because the sun had passed over there, and say before he could get back in the house, the wind come over. And when Sarah Holland tree lit him, a Sarah Holland tree, the leaf, saying, turn him 3 Somerset. That's how hard it blew. Turn him 3 Somerset. Now, let me say this. After Hurricane 32, so Reckley could tell you, George, there was weeks cleaning up around here, weeks. I mean, coming in this road down there, you took the time to get out to the dock down there, but there was no dock down there then, not that time. It took you a long time. You go up, jumping, climbing, so many things across the road. Yeah, and the most important thing, after 32, after Green Turtle Cay claimed to be a Christian. One time when they was to the washing clothes, you could hear them singing gospel all over town. You could go out, you could hear them singing all about gospel singing, Christians. And your soul got saved in Hurricane Floyd. So they can't convince me that Floyd was as heavy as 32. And this is the truth what I'm telling you. And several people lived on the house roofs, different ones. And like I said, all the houses, plenty of the houses down off. Because I was man, the water come, our house, live around the back road, and the water come up under the floor where we was living. And all down, and the white sand was sunk down and through there was water. When 32. That's how bad it was. And I don't want to see neither another one like that. That's what I remember. Yeah.
Thank you, Marcel. I'm sure the questions have come come to mind, so save them and we'll ask.
Now keep your eye out for these young gals.
All right, George. What do you remember? What do you remember?
Okay, I'll tell you what I remember what happened to me.
And you were how old at the time?
7.
Same as, okay.
I remember when we happened to, my mother and I, and one or two, my sister Doris, which was Patricia's mother, and I think at that time Mama had three kids. Anyway, we were all at my grandfather's house and grandmother, which was situated right where the fish house is now, up there where they buy the crawfish. And there was 3 houses in the yard. One that they slept in and just what they call they used to call it the big house, but it was big in that day, but it wasn't really big now. Anyway, the next one was smaller, which was the dining room, and then another smaller one out where which they call the kitchen. So when this hurricane came over, as it keep getting worse, Marcel gave you some rundown on how it keep increasing. But there was a tall coconut tree right out on the water's edge, and we stood there to the window and watched that coconut tree fall out in the water. When it blew down, it went in the water, and my grandfather walked out there, water caught him around there, and he cut off the bunches of coconuts. However, it went on, it kept increasing until the big house blew off the blocks and went against the next one, which was the dining room. By that time, in the dining room, my grandmother and they were cooking. But at that time, when the house blew off the blocks and hit against the dining room, it was time to leave because food and all just stayed there. Nobody waited to get anything. I remember my mother took me by the hand, and we headed up to this. We went right across where the fish house is now. By the time we got in the cemetery, all the fence, they had wooden fence all the way around, and it was all flat on the ground. So we crawled over it, straight on up through, and the wind and the sand was stinging in your face, so that you could hardly make it. Anyway, we got to the other end of the graveyard, got over the fence, and right by where Jean Lowe's house is now, there was a smaller house there, Olive Bethel and E.B. they call him. And he had a small little place which he had for a liquor store. And there was a huge pear tree, almost about the size of the one Floyd had there in his yard. And that blew down. So when we got by it, we sat there for a little shelter. And until somehow the wind took that from us. So we crawled along right around the front of the hill, right around the front of where Jean's house is now, right at the bottom edge of the steps, where you come around. Mm-hmm. We crawled around there, and on the opposite side, as soon as we get around the other side, there was another big tree of some kind was there, and we got on the side of it. And from the school residence, which was where the school residents are now, it blew down, and a piece came. I was sitting, we were facing this way, like you two did. My mother's on this side, I'm on that side, facing in this direction. And the schoolhouse was that way, and it blew down and one piece came and hit my mother on the left arm and broke it. So she didn't realize she had a broken arm until she went to put it down to sort of fix herself in some, and she said, "Oh, my arm broke." Just about that time she said that Franks, some of these know the granddad, you know him.
Oh, yeah.
Well, okay, his daddy came down off the hill steps, and he was praying as he was walking, and my mother hailed him, and he came there and took us and put us there on the steps, where you go up the steps there, but on this side was higher because it was cut down since then, and it's higher, and it gave us about, if I'm right, about 4 or 5 feet our shelter, and the wind was coming from that way. So I don't know what hour of the night it was, but it was probably midnight when he took us there, and there were other people there covered up in blankets right on the steps, and we stayed there till next morning when daylight. It was still blowing, and they took us from there and took us out in the quarry, what they call the quarry out there where the powerhouse was, and that used to be a big hole, but it's been filled in since since then. And down inside there was quite a good shelter, and quite a number of people was there until we spent all that day until that night and the next day there before the hurricane really left. And I remember a horse. You remember the Lily? It was.
Yeah.
Came down and fell down in the quarry,
remember that.
broke its neck, and
Horse died, yeah.
well, when we left there, when the hurricane was over, and we came out of the quarry, my mother and daddy's house, our house, had moved from where there's, well, they wouldn't know, but you know where Leon's house is now.
Yeah, right.
Our house blew out on the playground there where they play volleyball. Didn't blow there, it floated there.
I'll tell you.
Because the water was from side to side, from the harbor across to the sea up there. And the house floated. The water, it was enough water that the house floated and sat on the playground. It didn't blow down, didn't blow apart. And we was lucky we stayed in that for quite a while until they got it moved back over to where it originally was. Well, after, like you say, it was all, the place was in a mess after the hurricane, and we had a truck come from, the government sent a truck over from Nassau, and the driver, and we had...
You know the driver's name?
Yeah, Gladstone.
Right.
Good job.
And Gal and Cooper were waiting clean in the truck cleaning
Right.
up. And so they were, I guess, 3-4 weeks
Oh, yeah, all of
before
that.
we got it
all
all
of that,
cleaned
all
up.
Of that, all of that.
But I don't know, I know all, the Methodist church was destroyed. The
hotel was blown
The
down.
hotel,
And the biggest church, so the Methodist church, yeah, there's the church about
that was a big stone building right there
About 1,400
where the custom building is now.
That was a big.
That was a big stone building like